Hello, I'm Peter Okocha. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. The deepest recession in a century, stark predictions for the global economy during the coronavirus crisis. The International Monetary Fund offers debt relief to African countries, but will it be enough? Nigeria extends its lockdown, but at what cost? The president says the restrictions are essential, but do the people agree? Also on the program, Children in Despair. A charity in Senegal steps in to help the street children in the capital Dakar survive the coronavirus.
They wait for us. They know that Village Pilot comes every day. They're happy to receive food. They're especially happy to see people who care about them.
And Ghana becomes the first country in Africa to launch a mobile app to track people with symptoms of COVID-19. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. The International Monetary Fund says it is providing debt relief to 25 of its poorest member states to help them fight the coronavirus pandemic. They include 19 countries from the continent, such as the DR Congo, the Gambia, Malawi, and Mozambique. The IMF is offering $500 million to help cover the debt obligations of these 25 countries over the next 6 months. The news comes as a new report from the World Bank and the IMF forecast an overall contraction for sub-Saharan economies of 3%. South Africa's GDP is projected to contract by 5.8% in 2020, while Nigeria's GDP is forecasted to fall by 3.4%. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Abebe Aimero Salasi. He's the director of the IMF's African Department. Your organization has warned of an economic dip globally this year. How bad will it be for Africa?
So, as you noted, we are expecting the global economy to shrink by at least 3% this year. In sub-Saharan Africa, we expect the contraction to be at least of the order of 1.6%. I have to add, though, that these projections are really subject to a great deal of uncertainty. Right now, what we are expecting is that the shutdowns that we've seen countries adopting to mitigate the spread of the pandemic will be limited to around a quarter, with a gradual recovery subsequently. If, however, it's a more extended shutdown, then we could see an even bigger hit to the region's economy.
So you've offered this debt relief to these 25 countries, 19 of which are in sub-Saharan Africa. How will this work?
So just to be very clear, I mean, this is one of a number of things that we're doing to support the region. We are, of course, providing quite extensive financing to, up to 90 countries that have requested emergency financing. In sub-Saharan Africa's case, there are 32 countries that have requested for support, and we will be providing them with resources to the tune of about $11.5 billion in a short period of time. Second, we're for the poorest countries in this group, 23 of which are in sub-Saharan Africa, we are providing debt relief so that for the rest of this year, these countries will not have to repay the IMF. Again, this is something that will create additional financing. If I could give you a concrete example, you mentioned Mozambique earlier. So Mozambique, for example, we're providing new financing to the tune of about $310 million to them to help address the health spending needs that they have, to do social protection, which is really, really important, as you would know, at this time when livelihoods are being appended. And then also they had about $15 million that were due to be repaid to the IMF in the remainder of this year. That's going to be waived.
I just want to pick up on something that you've mentioned there, saying that they will not have to repay their debt. So is this an actual debt cancellation, or is it a debt holiday, so to speak?
So for the payments that are due from these countries to the IMF, we're providing offsetting grants. So indeed, it is a grant that will offset the payments you would otherwise have had to make the country.
So these countries would not have to pay these months' debt in the next, later on, after this crisis is over?
No, for the remainder of this year, the amounts that the country was going to have to pay the IMF on account of earlier loans will not have to be repaid ever.
Now, it's mentioned that this debt relief is for 6 months. Is there room for an extension should this pandemic continue globally?
So, Peter, we would hope that first and foremost, the pandemic will be as short as possible so that our countries can recover. But we are committed to try and do whatever we can to support the members. We have to realize and we have to generate donor funding for this. And that's one of the first things that we have done to go seek financing so that we can offer this. And we have the generosity of several governments, including the UK government, the Japanese government, who have provided us with these resources.
Okay, that's Abebe Emro Salasi, Director of the IMF's Africa Development Department. Thanks a lot for speaking to us here on Focus on Africa.
Thank you, Peter.
To Nigeria now, where the extension of their coronavirus lockdown has been followed with protests in some areas. The restrictions will run for another 14 days, and President Muhammadu Buhari insists they are essential to limit the spread of the disease. But police in Lagos and Ogun State have been deployed to break up groups of people who say the lockdown means their families cannot eat, as Chichi Izundu explains.
This is not a joke, it's a matter of life and death. The words by President Buhari to the people of Nigeria in his address last night. He said that the last 2 weeks of the lockdown have allowed authorities to try and find the people that may have come into contact with positive coronavirus patients. So they need more time. They need to contact trace more people, and therefore he's extending the lockdown in the Federal Capital Territory of Abuja, in Lagos and Ogun states to try and find those people who may be positive of COVID-19. The health minister says that people should try and wear masks. He's recommended that everyone cover their mouth and nose to try and prevent the spread of COVID-19. Here in Lagos, they're going door to door to try and find cases of anyone who may have been coming in contact with anyone who has tested positive. And they're also saying that people should not be stigmatized. But for the people here, the people that live in Nigeria, there are two big problems. The first is on security. There's been numerous reports of armed robbers taking advantage of the lockdown and vandalizing and looting people's homes. Police here in Lagos say yesterday they arrested 191 people.
And now there's robbery everywhere. Like the other day I was going out around 9 a.m. I was robbed with my market money because I wanted to go and buy market. And they robbed me of my money. So I had to go and borrow money to start market. So I have a lot of debts and nobody's going to help me pay it. They go into people's home. Now, I was robbed while I was going home, so I was outside my house. But now the robbers break into people's home and rob because of coronavirus.
The second complaint is that they're angry. They're angry because they're hungry. The people around us here say that they haven't heard from the government. They've been offered nothing, and they are concerned about not just their hunger, but how much longer they can sustain this for.
Chichi Uzundu there from Lagos in Nigeria. Well, France is another country that has extended its lockdown due to the coronavirus. President Macron says after May the 11th, schools, nurseries and universities will progressively reopen. People will gradually return to work, though cafes, restaurants and cinemas will remain shut. Our Paris correspondent Lucy Williamson reports.
After a month, the unthinkable has become the barely thought about. And the extension of France's quarantine restrictions caused little surprise. In a televised address, President Macron said there would be no end to the lockdown here for another 4 weeks.
From the 11th of May, we will gradually open nurseries and schools. It's a priority for me, as the current situation is widening inequality. Too many children, especially in our poorer districts and rural areas, don't have digital access and can't be helped by their parents in the same way.
Marcel runs several bars, including this one in central Paris. It's been very hard, he says. First they had to close for the Yellow Vest protests, now for coronavirus. He agrees with a suggestion put forward by France's Business Association that people will need to work more than usual after the lockdown is lifted to rebuild the economy.
I agree, even if it was a bit brutal. It'll need effort from all French people. I think if you were to ask everyone to work perhaps 1 hour more each day, maybe work 40 hours a week for a year or two, but then who will pick up the bill? Businesses, bosses, workers, everyone must make an effort. A war effort.
The French finance minister has already said the country is probably facing its worst recession since the Second World War. And despite some signs that the crisis here might be easing, President Macron said the lockdown would be extended again. In Spain, meanwhile, Europe's first glimpse of rush hour after COVID. Faceless commuters, more than just a cliché now. The demand for protection suggesting a certain nervousness. Few of those wearing masks already refused the offer of a spare. Construction and manufacturing firms are among those allowed to start work again in Spain, but most of the population still remains in quarantine. Italy is due to relax the rules for a small number of firms as its death toll passed 20,000. After the challenge of enforcing national lockdowns, countries across Europe are now beginning to face the equally delicate task of how to end it. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Paris.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come, does this app have the answer to coronavirus? It's proving popular in Singapore. Find out why something similar could be coming to a phone near you after the break. I'm Peter Okwoche. Our top stories this hour. The International Monetary Fund has issued a new bleaker forecast for the global economy, saying it'll shrink by 3% this year, more than 6% worse than it forecast in January and more severe than after the financial crash a decade ago. And Nigeria's coronavirus lockdown will run for another 14 days. President Muhammadu Buhari insists they are essential to limit the spread of the disease. Now, Senegal is not under complete lockdown, but there is a curfew and life has drastically slowed down. Non-essential shops are closed. The social distancing measures are hurting the most vulnerable. Amongst them, the children begging in the streets of the capital, Dakar. But a local charity is now stepping up to feed them. Olivier Weber has this report.
Their sight is so common in the streets of Dakar that people barely pay attention. Street boys struggling to survive. Many are Quranic school students known as talibé who are forced to beg by their teachers. Others are simply homeless. Since the outbreak of the virus, many of the restaurants and bakeries that would offer the children food have closed. Generous pedestrians are scarcer. A local charity, Village Pilote, is stepping up its efforts to feed the children.
The street children benefit from the informal economy. They do small jobs in markets, such as supplying water buckets to women selling vegetables. Markets are closed, so they don't get those jobs carrying things. Begging at bus stops or with taxi drivers is more difficult, since there is much less traffic. There are much less people in the street. Outside nightclubs, outside restaurants, outside hotels. Once again, they can't beg there anymore, so it has become really difficult.
Village Pilote has been around for nearly 30 years and ordinarily shelters children, but since last week it felt compelled to begin daily food distributions.
En fait, ils nous attendent.
They wait for us. They know that Village Pilot comes every day. They're happy to receive food. They're especially happy to see people who care about them, because at the moment it's not really easy for them. They used to be seen as pariahs, but now with the disease, people avoid them even more.
The campaign group Human Rights Watch estimates that more than 100,000 talibé across the country are forced to beg. They aren't the only ones in danger. The Senegalese government is making plans to offer food aid to millions of people. The poor and the vulnerable are the first to suffer from the effects of coronavirus. Olivier Weber, BBC News.
Let's go to Ethiopia now, where the government has declared a state of emergency and allocated more than $150 million in response to the coronavirus outbreak. And after a call from Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, banks and wealthy individuals are also contributing millions of dollars and, as Kalkida Nibeltal reports, other important resources.
When Hamalmal Abate, a prominent pop star in Ethiopia, heard the government might not have enough rooms to quarantine incoming travelers and people suspected of being exposed to the coronavirus, she decided to offer her help. She is lending this single-family house for the government to use until the crisis is over.
We have seen what is happening even in countries with advanced healthcare systems. Here, unless we help each other, it's going to be worse than those places. It will be difficult. I think now is the time that we have to come together and assist the government in ways we can.
Many believe Ethiopia doesn't have a robust healthcare system equipped to handle the deadly outbreak. By the end of March, information obtained from the Ministry of Health indicated that the country of 110 million people had a few hundred functioning ventilators and 1,200 beds in isolation centers. Cities outside the capital are just beginning to test for the virus. So authorities have not been hesitant to ask for help from wealthy countries and multinational organizations, but also from Ethiopians that can afford to help. And many Ethiopians have responded to calls from the government.
In these hard times, we have seen that Ethiopia has citizens that donate their money, their house, their car, their hotel, their building, whatever they have. This time will pass. You, all Ethiopians, are members of the army fighting against the coronavirus.
Ethiopia has ordered all incoming travelers to be quarantined in selected hotels with their own expenses. While the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Africa's second most populous nation remains to be low, many believe that could change with increased testing. The country also expects a surge in the number of people needing isolation centers. Many fear the worst is yet to come. And for people like Hamalmal, coming together as a country in implementing measures introduced by authorities and offering help when it is needed will be critical in the fight against the deadly outbreak. Kalkida Nibeltal, BBC News, Addis Ababa.
Now, Singapore is under a strict lockdown amid the coronavirus, and the city-state is applying a strategy of containment, testing and contact tracing, including a mobile phone app that tracks potential exposure to the virus. Since its launch in March, the Trace Together app has been downloaded more than 1 million times. But as Sarah Toms reports, it's raising questions about privacy.
Sham and his partners at this special effects company are getting set for a tight month ahead as Singapore locks down even further to contain a recent spike in cases. But he feels some sense of security from an app designed to support contact tracing efforts in the event of infection.
It's about taking responsibility for your actions as well and for those around you, whether they're colleagues or friends. So the faster I'm notified, the faster I can get them out of harm's way.
Singapore has been praised for its handling of the outbreak, and one of the government's tools is this app called Trace Together, which connects via Bluetooth to other users nearby.
Contact tracing is extremely difficult. Try doing it when you have a fever, you have aches and you're feeling unwell. You have to do this over the phone, give contact numbers, at the same time remember what happened the last 3 to 5 days. It's almost impossible. And yet the better we do it, the better the results. The app takes over that.
As other countries look at developing similar apps, Singapore has made its software freely available, but it also raises concerns about security and privacy. The government says that this app is collecting only the data it needs and not checking locations or contacts. If, however, I happen to get too close to someone infected with the virus for too long, the Ministry of Health will be in touch. Otherwise, the encrypted data will disappear after 21 days.
Yeah, that's looking good. Can it come up
Sham and his American business partner Paul feel that having the app outweighs concerns about security.
To begin with, you wouldn't have social media accounts, things like that. And because we live in a small country, it wouldn't be difficult to find out anything about you if the government really wanted to.
I feel that we're fairly well protected, but overall at this point I'm thinking it's more a benefit of the greater good.
Security and privacy. Still, some security experts worry governments could use the data to spy on citizens and that companies could profit from an invasion of privacy.
We have to strike the right balance. We do want to end the lockdown. We do want to combat coronavirus, but we don't want to pay such a high price of the kind that could change the way society works forever.
Here in Singapore, people are generally in step with the government measures, whether it's temperature checks or the Trace Together app. But as other countries strive to contain COVID-19, the balance between the community good and individual liberty may not be so easy to achieve. Sarah Toms, BBC News, Singapore.
Well, Ghana is another country where an app is being trialled from today to trace COVID-19 victims. The country has recorded a total of 636 confirmed cases of the virus and 8 deaths. The BBC's Thomas Nadi joins me now from Accra. Thomas, this app is different from the one being used in Singapore. How does this one work?
Well, this app basically enables the health authorities to identify and trace all suspected cases of COVID-19 through the contact details provided on the app. And it also has features which enable users to check for symptoms of the disease and then risk factors. So, for instance, if there's a confirmed case, the authorities are able to trace all persons who might have come into contact with the patients through the help of a GPS.
And we've also heard about those concerns for privacy in Singapore. Do those concerns exist in Ghana as well?
Of course, there have been similar concerns about privacy. The security of personal data has been an issue of concern. But the authorities have said that all personal data on the app will be encrypted to guarantee confidentiality.
Okay, so just about the same thing as in Singapore. But what do the authorities in Ghana hope? What kind of difference do they hope this app will make in the fight against COVID-19?
Well, Peter, this app is new. And then today, the officials told us that they've been able to identify about 100 suspected cases of the disease among those who are using the app. And then they've said that it's going to be a game changer in preventing the spread of COVID-19.
And Thomas, very briefly, do we know how many people have downloaded this app yet?
It's been a lot of people. It's still unclear how many might have downloaded now, but the number of people who've downloaded the app is quite significant.
Okay, Thomas Nadi there, live from Accra in Ghana. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much. And just to end, this is a reminder of the top coronavirus news lines from today. The International Monetary Fund has offered a debt relief to African countries, but will it be enough to help fight the deepest recession in a century? And Nigeria has extended its lockdown, but at what cost? The president says the restrictions are essential, but not everyone seems to agree. And as you've just heard, Ghana becomes the first country in Africa to launch a mobile app to track people with symptoms of COVID-19. And that's it from Focus on Africa. Remember, you can get in touch with me on social media. I'm at Okwocha. But for now, from Focus on Africa and from me, Peter Okwocha, thanks for watching.